Hey everyone, and welcome back to NDC. Today we're going to be talking about the Progress View and Gauge. These are your go-to tools for showing users how far along something is. They're best used in different ways. The Progress View is more for showing progress towards finishing a task, like a download or loading something, and Gauge is for showing a current value within a range. Think of a speedometer or battery level, or even tracking your progress as you do, timers or workouts. So here I have an example of the very basic progress view where we can see that this is loading and it's actually going to be loading forever. We also have a battery, which we've assigned to be the value of 0.65. So we can say that this is currently 65%. We're of course displaying this with text, but if we were to assign this to be a variable, which we'll be doing later on, we can actually update and show this information in real time. So we're going to be starting off by hopping into the progress view basics. So that progress view, we can declare it by typing out progress view and add our parameters. We actually don't need to pass anything through the parameters in order to see the progress view. However, this basic default progress view shows this indefinite loading kind of circular motion, which is a great thing to show if you are, using maybe async image, and while you need that placeholder before the image is loaded, using that progress view is going to tell users that something's loading, something's happening in the background. It's similar to the kind of pinwheel of doom on the Mac when things are loading. We can also pass through a string value within the parameters here. So if we want to tell people what we're doing, so in this case, we're loading data. You can see here, it's added the text, so people know what's going on. Sometimes you might want to put like a triple dot, so they know what's coming. Now we can change the progress view style by adding the dot progress view style afterwards, and within the argument brackets, we can use dot notation to see what it's all about. We can do circular, so that's going to be that circular spinning gauge. This is the default one, and we can also do the dot linear. Now the linear one, we will need to pass through some data so we're able to visually see the progress as it's happening. Right now our loading data, it's going to stay blank forever. If we change this back to circular for a moment, we can change the color by adding the dot tint property and then passing through a color. So in this case, I'm going to pass through blue, and our spinner has updated to be that blue color. We can also change the control size, and we have some different sizes here: large, small, regular, extra large, and mini. Let's go ahead and pop this thing on extra large, and our spinner is now quite large and in charge. So use this setup when you don't know the task's total time. This is like I'm loading or grabbing something from the internet, not sure how long this is going to take, so we're going to be displaying this indefinite spinner here. As I mentioned, another great use of the progress view is if we want to determine progress. How far along are we with something? So within the argument brackets, we're going to make sure there's no string, and we're going to instead have a value. We're going to tie this to be our progress. We're going to spell it the exact same as our variable, and we're going to do a comma, and we're going to put our total. So what is the maximum amount of progress? What's like 100% for us? That's going to be 1.0. Okay, and we can see that it's given us that progress bar style. We can give it a couple different properties. Let's add some tint, and we'll make it purple, one of my favorite colors. And then let's also add some padding, so it's not kind of flying off the sides of the screen there. So we need a way to be able to see the progress that the user has. This might be something that you track in the app separately. I'm just going to use a button for demonstration purposes. We can call it start, or like maybe increase progress. And I want this to have the progress. Maybe we can increase it every single time. So let's take our progress and we'll plus equals 0.1. So every time we press this button, it should increase our progress for basically 10%. We're going to press. We can see here, every time the button's pressed, the progress goes until it's full. It's at the total, it's at the max 1.0. So we're, completed the progress. Now, that works, but it looks a little bit janky. So what I would suggest doing is doing a with animation. Anytime you are increasing the progress as one of these bars, trust me, it looks a whole lot nicer. We're going to wrap that in with animation, and you can customize this animation however you like. The default animation isn't too terrible. We can see here, we're able to fill up that progress bar. So this is really good for downloads, uploads, anything with a measurable completion. The progress bar is pretty good. Again, we're doing this with a button that increases it, but if you're tracking this or increasing this variable elsewhere, you can of course use that information in real time since it's a state variable. Also use custom total values if we create another progress view. And now within here, we can pass through a static value. We'll make this one 40, and then a total of 100. That's a tint here. Let's do orange this time. And there we go. Before we go into further customization, let's quickly talk a little bit about gauges. I'd also recommend creating a state private variable for any of the different, kind of information that you're using or passing along. In this case, let's do a battery level. And let's also make this one a double. We'll have this one be by default 0.75. So that should be like 75% battery. We can create the gauge by using the gauge keyword, and you can see that there's tons of autofill options here, but I'm just going to be starting off with the most basic one. And at the most basic, we're going to be including a value. So we're going to tie this to be our battery level. Now you'll notice we don't actually have to use the binding here because within the gauge, we're not manually shifting or changing the value. We're just displaying what it is. After, we can add a comma and we'll do in. From here, we can select a range. So since we're using a decimal value, I'm going to do 0 to 1. So that's our kind of max range. We have a battery level that's going to show from 0% to basically 100%, 1.0. You can also include some text and styling, although you also can include a label within the gauge. But you might just want some extra control by just adding the text here. So there's our battery level, but we're not quite done yet. We can actually display the current value label. So within here, we can actually, display the percent of what the battery actually is. So let's add some text and we'll go ahead and first interpolate the current battery level. Now, if we just put battery level like this, it looks a little bit janky. So we can do a little bit of magic and we can actually wrap our battery level in an integer. So I'm going to add some brackets around it, then add the integer. So it's like a string interpolation int battery level. Still not quite done. We're going to times this now by 100, and then we're going to add a percent sign there. So we can see we're transforming into an integer and we're timesing that value by 100, and then outside of the string interpolation adding our percent sign so we can see 75%. There's a few other things we can do. We can add a minimum value label here. And within the code, we can just say that this would be 0%. So the users know, okay, we're on a gauge from 0 to, and then let's do maximum value. And we'll have our text be 100%. Now, you may have seen the error is whenever we do have the minimum value, we also need to include that maximum value. Now users can see all the way on the left would be 0%, all the way on the right would be 100%, and we're currently at 75%. We can also apply a tint. So maybe if we're displaying battery life, that's probably usually represented by green. I think if you have like low power mode on, it's like yellow or something on the iPhone. So I would use gauges when your value isn't tied to completion, but rather to be for a scale. Okay, cool. Let's talk about styling these views now. So we have our gauge, which we've looked at before, and we can actually just have a value here. Let's set this to be 0.6. Go ahead and add our text, and let's call this one maybe the CPU. Now we can have different gauge styles. So outside of the gauge, we can do the dot gauge style. From here, we can use our dot notation, and we can see that we have quite a few options. Let's start off with the accessory circular. We can see here, it kind of looks like a speedometer, and where we currently are, I'll zoom in a little bit here, where we currently are, which is at 60%, is represented by this circle on the gauge. If we were to change this to something low, like 0.1, or something high, like 0.9, it kind of moves across. Think of it like a speedometer that starts all the way over here, and then, kind of fills on up with the line. We can take a look at some other styles. Let's go ahead and copy and paste this, and maybe instead of CPU, we have like GPU. Instead of the accessory circular, how about we do the circular capacity? We can see here, this is something that's more familiar with battery percents, and based on the value that we do have here, so if we set this to be 0.3, the bar has not been quite filled up. So instead of tracking it with like the little circle, it's filling in the bar. If we wanted to change the color that it's being filled, so let's in this case do green, we can of course change that. This is a pretty good way to represent, like battery life or something. There are of course those linears, which we've definitely seen before. So the top will make accessory linear, and then we'll do this one capacity. So the ones that kind of have the suffix of capacity are very reminiscent of those progress bars, whereas if we just have the linear ones, they kind of represent where we are with this little circle here. Let's talk about my favorite way of using gauges, which is the kind of gradient effect. So I'm going to call this one storage, just for our example here, and we'll be playing around with the value again. But let's go ahead and add a tint, and then this time within the argument brackets, we're going to add a gradient. From there, we can add our colors, which is going to be an array of different colors. So let's do some cool colors. I'm a big purple, orange fan. Let's add a third one. Let's do pink. That might not stick out that much. Let's do white. So now, based on the progress, we can see that we actually have this gradient. So if I were to change this to be 100%, so 1.0, we can see our full beautiful gradient. Oh, the white isn't the best choice there. Let's change this to be blue instead. The white's kind of fading off into existence. So we can use this gradient to really stylize our gauge. And this works for all the different gauge styles as well. So let's set this to be 0.5. We can see that our blue gradient is kind of getting cut off here. But if we were to change our style again, so let's do our gauge style. So let's then try our circular here with our gradient. Looks beautiful. And then the circular capacity. That one works great. A way that I like to use gauges is to actually, depending on the value, update and change the color. So see here, we've created a state private variable to track the person's speed. We've then created a switch, which is basically going to give us a color based off of the value. So in the case of their speed being 0 to 60, green, 60 to 90, yellow. Every other case, so you're going too fast, it's going to be red. Afterwards, we have our gauge, which has that speed value. We have the same range, display what it looks like. And then for the tint, we're actually looking at that speed color in order to update how it looks. We then added a slider just to simulate, but ideally you'd be grabbing this information from how fast the user is going, or however way you want to kind of use this in your application. Okay, and before we wrap on up here today, I want to talk a little bit about sizing, because currently this gauge is a little bit small. Now, the unfortunate thing is if we add a frame here with a width and a height, let's set this to be something like 400 by 400, right? It's not going to actually update the size of the gauge. When we're updating the frame, essentially we're just going to be updating the space around the gauge, which isn't really ideal. Instead, we'd want to use something like the scale effect. I'm going to replace our frame here with a dot scale effect. From here, we can pass through a number. So if we did 1.5, this would essentially display it at 150% bigger. So think of 1.0 being normal size. If we were to do something like 0.5, it's going to be so small we can't see it. The only thing with doing this is, so let's go ahead and set this to be 2.0, which would be 200%. If we were to add any other elements, so if I were to add an SF symbol, let's just grab one from the library real quick. Sure, the square arrow up, why not? We can see as we increase the scale effect, there may be some clipping that's going on. So although the frame isn't going to really allow us to increase the size, we still may need it to push other elements around with the scale effect. So let's go ahead and give this a frame. If we can fix the clipping, and there we go. So you'll still probably need the frame with that scaling effect. Just keep it in mind. Just as a bonus tip, if you're using the circular gauge style or linear gauge style, the size is actually primarily determined by the container view and the frame. For any precise control, wrap the gauge within a geometry reader and draw it relative to the available space. So that wraps us up for the progress view. This is great for any ongoing tasks with a start to finish, downloads, uploads, imports. The gauge is more for those real-time status changes, but doesn't have an end. So think of things like temperature, speed, battery, workout progress timers are all pretty great. You now know how to stylize them, how to change the colors that they display, even a gradient. Both of these support those rich customizations that we saw for better user feedback. So try adding them to your app today and make your UI more informative and engaging. Make sure you like and subscribe for more SwiftUI developer tutorials. Dream big, code bigger, and we'll see you in the next one.